A controversial, no-nonsense cop. 14 years after he left the force, some people remember him with fondness and call for his return. Others say retirement is exactly where he should stay. Who's the man behind the headlines? This evening, my guest is Reneto Adams. I'm Archibald Gordon, and this is Profile. Reneto Adams, welcome to Profile.
Thank you, and Happy New Year to you, Jamaica, your listeners and your viewers, and a very good evening.
Thank you so much. Yeah. So 14 years now into retirement, and yet wherever you go, you still make headlines. What do you think accounts for that?
My historical contribution to this country, of course, in all areas, crime fighting, protecting the Jamaican people, you know, seeing to it that the people go about their lawful business in peace, to the exclusion of any criminal interference. And to that extent, I think I excel, and Jamaican people continue to remember those days.
And a big defiant personality at the same time, which did not start just now and recently at all.
Very defiant as it relates to having my own way, doing the right things that I think are the right things.
Let's talk about the roots of that. Growing up, Beecher Plains, Treasure Beach, St. Elizabeth. What was early family life like?
Okay, historically, I was born in 1948 to Merton and Mabel Adams. And at that time, I went to school, the primary school in Beecher Plains. But before having reached there, my father at a particular time, when he was in America, came home and said to Mummy that observing this boy, I wanted him to become a policeman.
And you would later on go on to become a policeman?
And I did that. Born in a very simple, humble village in those days, went to school barefooted. In some instances, you wore the same shirt and pants for 1 week. Only that Mummy would have washed it overnight and had it ironed in the morning. So when we returned from school also for lunch, it wasn't anything exorbitant. She would have mixed flour, probably as it were at that time, with only water. And then you would have had 3 stones in the kitchen, upon which they put a round piece of iron, and the flour was thrown on that, and it became baked. And that was sliced and given to me, along with what in those days we call sugar and water. Lemonade, pretty name nowadays.
Yes.
And we were satisfied with that and went back to school. So when we came in the evening, it was almost the same thing. We had a particular observation to make. When you're near the house, you saw 2 smokes. One, if it were very dark, dinner wasn't ready, or maybe just put on. One, if it was very white, dinner was ready. And we were then happy and elated.
Now, what were you like when you were going to primary school? Because you've told me that even then you were very defiant.
Yes, I remember having done, in those days we call it scripture. Listen. Conducted by the principal at that time, H.B. Crawford, Hensor Barrington Crawford. And the whole ramification of his disciples and Jesus Christ and so on, and he was crucified on the cross and all that stuff. However, he asked if any of us had any observation. I don't think he used the word observation at that time, but anything to ask about the scripture. And I paused, waited until a few guys asked their questions, which were probably answered to my, indignation, because I didn't believe some of the answers. And I asked, when my time came, what color Jesus Christ was.
You as a child were asking what
as a
color
child, and
Jesus.
that is 60 odd years ago I'm talking. In those days, well, let me further on the answer. He rhetorically put the answer to me. The questions to me. And I said, I know he was a black man. And probably for about 3 minutes, everybody became dumb.
This was unheard of.
Including the teacher.
You had silence in the classroom.
Silence, total silence.
Because every picture of Jesus Christ that most people have
was
ever
white.
seen.
Everything was white. The angels were white. The church, all the angels and all this thing inside the church depicted those people as being white. So Crawford's pronouncement on me was that I had blasphemed.
You are a troublemaker.
Yes, and I'm a troublemaker, and But before that, I also came out of the Black Power, or it was the Black Power movement then that was going on in America and other places over the world, and especially so in Africa. And he pronounced upon me 2 weeks suspension from school.
He suspended you from school?
For 2 weeks. Then the irony which followed that, I could not have gone home and said to Mommy that I was suspended for 2 weeks. So, as explicit as I would want to be, I stayed away from school, hide in the bushes. And when my classmates and so on, in the evening I would have asked them for the notes and so on.
You hid for 2 weeks?
Yes. And sometime after Mommy found out. And he also pronounced on me the name Fidel Castro. At that time, Fidel Castro had just taken over, I think.
This is former Cuban president.
Former president of Cuba. He had just kicked out
Batista.
Batista. And I followed at that young stage, even then. I may have been, 11, 12.
Because even then, people were seeing you as a bit of a rebel. And ironically, later on, rather than being a rebel, in a sense, the expectation from your father was that you would become a policeman. And that is where we're going to be headed when Profile returns right after these messages. Stick around. We are talking to Reneto Adams, and we're back with you right after the break.